You're listening to Productivity Protected, the podcast that's all about data privacy and security. We'll unpack emerging threats, hot issues in data security, and top ways to protect your data and how you work. Here's your host, Spencer Kupferman.
Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back to the Productivity Protected podcast. I'm your host, Spencer Kupferman, the CEO of PKWARE. We've got a fantastic show for you today. We have a very special guest. Now, I know I always say that we have a special guest, but we actually do have a very special guest. We always have special guests here on Productivity Protected. This is a really interesting, real interesting subject matter for our listeners. PKWARE is an international company. We have customers all over the world. We have employees based all over the world. And cybersecurity, one can argue, is a pandemic in and of itself. The concept of cybersecurity is put in place to defend against, the pandemic of nefarious cyber attacks against different types of data, whether it's ransomware, malware, phishing, a host of other different cybersecurity attacks. Cyber hygiene is important to everyone around the world, not just here in the United States. And here in the United States, we are a leader. We are a world leader in cybersecurity, and we can't do it ourselves. The West is coming together with a coalition of allies across the world to defeat these nefarious state actors and individual actors who are out there trying to shake companies down, trying to damage government infrastructure, and God forbid, even in some cases, start world wars over these types of attacks. I'm proud to say that the United States partners with one of those allies very closely. That's the state of Israel, who is also known worldwide as a leader in cybersecurity. Of course, those of you who follow the news in the Middle East or you follow Israel from a technology innovation perspective know that it's one of the leading innovation technology hubs in the world. Formerly known as the startup nation. I think that's changed now to scale up nation. From what I've read lately, a lot of awesome stories, a lot of awesome products we use every day. Don't even know that they were invented and innovated in the state of Israel. Today, like I said, we're very lucky and honored to have with us Josh Cohen, who's the director of Cyber, Economic, and Trade Office at the Embassy of Israel in Washington, D.C. And I'll give a brief, if I can, intro here for Josh. Josh is a native of Chicago, Illinois. So for all of our, we're, as PKWARE is a Milwaukee-based company, so we're almost neighbors. And Josh really is director of cyber in the Washington, D.C. Embassy. He focuses on connecting innovative Israeli cybersecurity firms with American partners, and also leads delegations to Israel to introduce American cyber practitioners to the dynamic Israeli cyber ecosystem. I, for one, as I had told Josh previously, I've actually been on one of these missions, not with Josh per se or the Embassy of Israel, but years ago I did go and got to see the cyber inner workings of Israel's cyber infrastructure in the south of the country, in the Negev Desert. Really inspiring and interesting to see the frontline battle against, as I said, these nefarious actors out there who are hacking and conducting these types of operations against Western targets, not just Israel, but all over the world. So we're here. Our episode today, Leading the Way, Israel's investment in cybersecurity. Like I said, cybersecurity is an international concern. We wanted to give a little bit of an international flavor here to our listeners. I also want always, as I usually do, give a shout out to our customers, our partners, our employee base around the world, and of course in the 414 in Milwaukee. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Leading the Way, Israel's investment in cybersecurity. We got a fantastic show. I can't wait to just dive into these questions. But first, I'm going to kick it over to Josh and give him a warm Productivity Protected welcome. Josh, thanks for joining us today.
It's my pleasure. I'm very happy and honored to be on a Productivity Protected podcast. It sounds like a great show that you guys do, and I look forward to our discussion.
Great. That's fantastic. I appreciate again, appreciate the time and the preparation as well. Let's just jump in here. Josh has been with the Embassy of Israel in this role for, I'm going to say 4 years roughly here. And so, he's inside baseball. And I think our listeners want to hear your perspective and the Embassy of Israel's perspective on a lot of these questions. So let's jump right in if we can. In one of our recent episodes, we talked about the fact that many people are surprised to learn that there's a tech company in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, that's about 36 years old. We often joke about that internally, and people are really surprised to hear about that in the Midwest. They'd probably be equally surprised to learn that roughly 20% of the world's cyber technology actually comes out of the tiny state of Israel. How did the country become a leading powerhouse in this industry?
So that's a really good question. It's not, I would say, one particular thing. And by the way, 20% may even be a little bit low. In 2021, 40% of all global private investment into cyber went into Israeli companies. So like you said, it's almost transitioning from startup nation to scale-up nation, right? I mean, you have companies like Wiz and Cybereason and SentinelOne that are becoming, behemoths in their own right and listing on the stock exchange. So Israel is sort of at the phase, at least in cyber, where there's kind of been that transition. So as for why, it's a really good question. I get asked that question all the time. There's not kind of a simple answer where it can be duplicated by, if we just do this. It's kind of a combination of factors that in many ways are unique to Israel. I would start with just the general decision, right, that you and I have talked about, where Israel was very early, one of the first countries in the world to actually prioritize cybersecurity. From the early 2000s, where they became aware of the kind of vulnerabilities associated with everything moving online. Then in 2010, Israel came up with a national strategy specifically on cybersecurity, approved by the then Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And it's just kind of grown since then. The Israel National Cyber Directorate, Israel was the first country in the world to actually set up a dedicated cyber agency. So there's been that kind of early adopter and early momentum. As a result of that, the government's prioritization of cybersecurity, a number of kind of things have happened, right? So Israel has, as part of around the time it created the Cyber Directorate, also launched 6 academic programs at 6 major Israeli universities. You've probably heard of some of them: Technion, Beersheba University of the Negev, and that has been a contributing factor where a lot of the technology, advanced technology out of that ends up leaking into the private sector and can be applied, by companies. A huge area, and I think it's may even be the biggest thing of all, is the way so many Israeli IDF military cyber specialists, when they leave, sort of famous units, for example, Unit 8200, they go into the startup community, right? So the Israeli model is actually quite unique, and in many ways very different. So, I mean, there's a startup, for example, in Israel called Centra. It was founded by a gentleman who recently, about a year and a half ago, stepped down as the full commander of 8200. And 8200, by the way, is not, just a sort of a small unit. It's about 10,000 people. It's sort of the closest Israeli equivalent to the NSA. It does SIGINT and everything around that, and there's a big subsection of cyber. So it's pretty unusual, for someone to go right from leading that type of organization to raising 23 million from Bessemer and being a co-founder at a major cloud data, security service, right? So you sort of have that culture embedded within Israel and within the military organizations. Units like 8200 are almost seen as graduate programs. Israeli kids, when they join the military, they target units like that, with the idea of doing that for a few years and then going to the startup community. So that's kind of a very unique model. I mean, if you think about it, it's unlikely, as talented as he is, that when the current head of NSA and U.S. Cyber Command departs, that he's going to immediately raise 23 million and be a co-founder in a T-shirt at a cloud data security startup, right? So that's a kind of very, very unique model, that military to I would say private sector pipeline. Then you've got education, where Israel prioritizes at a very early age, even in as early as middle school, identifying promising cyber talent and sort of nurturing it. As the, I would say, fame of 8200 has grown, and as people have seen what comes out of 8200, a lot of parents, the same way we may practice for, send our kids to, SAT prep, people actually want their kids to go into units like that with a long-term sort of perspective. So there's that culture as well, where it's sort of imbued within the broader Israeli society that this is something important and a way to make a contribution and a career, and the government kind of promotes that. So you've also got, and this is not necessarily unique to Israel, I think we share that with the US, but the sort of extremely entrepreneurial, not afraid to fail culture, where sort of failure can almost be seen as kind of badge of honor in a way, right? It's assumed that if you've been through one or two of these and something has failed, that you're going to do a much better job next time. So there's that, and people are not afraid to do crazy stuff. And if you think about it, right, so if you're in 8200 and you see your buddy who left a year earlier than you, and he's a co-founder at a cyber startup, the idea doesn't seem so daunting, right? He's your friend, he can do it, why not me, right? So you sort of have that also kind of chain almost reaction. So, and you combine that with kind of the Israeli, what I would describe as Israeli chutzpah, and it's a pretty good combination. But there's no sort of one single answer. It's just kind of all these factors combined together, along with the neighborhood that Israel lives in. That's basically kind of what it is, kind of all sort of coming together in a single kind of package from multiple angles.
No, I appreciate that. I think our listeners would appreciate, you made a few points that stuck out to me. Of course, the cultural aspect. You mentioned really the roots, as they say in Hebrew, the shoresh of where this cyber culture in Israel emanates from. It emanates from 8200, and that's where it was born. And then the integration of the alumni, which you made a point, which is very aspirational for many who participate in this unit, who are fortunate enough. Of course, not all. I'm assuming you said there's roughly 10,000 or so folks who get admitted or serving at any one time in that unit. It's a big unit, but not everybody is fortunate enough to be in 8200. Just like here in the U.S., there are certain units that not everybody is fortunate enough to be able to enter into for one reason or the other. I think that cultural aspect is what really sticks out to me. And then you talked about failing and how that's kind of looked upon in a positive way in that society, creating experience upon which you can build on, and then from an entrepreneurial perspective, be able to build your next go around, maybe the next ways, or so on and so forth. So appreciate that insight. So let's keep going here. Not only is Israel collaborating with superpowers, of course, not just the United States, but other Western countries are leaning on Israel for all sorts of technology. Water being a huge one. Water, we all have a water issue in years to come. Israel is leading the world in water technology as well, but also assisting smaller nations in creating cybersecurity startups. How do you attract and work with foreign investors. I know there are 43, Josh, roughly, you told me yesterday, I'm going to just, so for the audience, 43 of these trade offices, again, the tiny state of Israel, 43 of these trade offices around the world. It's big, big business. And it's important. I guess Israel's out there with their brand, trying to spread their technology and their brand because it's proven. How do you attract these foreign investors? Certainly some of the smaller ones. Of course, we're talking about the United States as well, but they're smaller ones as well.
That's a very good question. And it's sort of a number of factors, right? So Israel has really prioritized sort of branding its tech sector. So in the past, prior to the pandemic, for example, if you've ever been at RSA, there is for several years there has been an Israel pavilion at RSA, and with the rainbow colors. Everyone knows it's there. Everyone comes by. And there's not too many other countries doing that, right? So Israel really uses organizations like mine, the Foreign Trade Administration, with the trade offices, to sort of punch above its weight, right? And it's, ultimately it's about the entrepreneurs and the technologies, not government, but the government really prioritizes this, and cyber exports are several $billion by Israel. So that's a huge contribution to the economy and the overall balance of payments. Now, in terms of what I do and how that relates to foreign investors, so my role is to connect Israeli companies with potential, customers, technology partners, funding. The home run, of course, would actually be attracting a foreign investor into Israel to actually have a presence. And there are several hundred global, multinational or large companies that actually have a presence in Israel. The reason they come is not, obviously, not surprisingly, not because of the size of the Israeli market, which is very small. Certain things that Israel is maybe less good at is, long-term infrastructure planning and stuff like that. But what Israel really specializes in, and that's why these multinationals come, is innovation, right? So companies set up there really to access the innovation ecosystem. Israelis even have a word for people from around the world, governments or companies who come to Israel to sort of check it out. They call them innovation tourists, right? Trying to understand what Israel is doing. But what's interesting is when these companies come, the type of work they're doing in many ways is not necessarily their core business. So for example, there are many major automakers there. They're not building cars in Israel, but they're doing research on and accessing technology for everything around connected cars and the digitalization of cars, cybersecurity, and in transport, right? So you have that aspect of multinationals coming to Israel that are looking to source that kind of technology.
No, that's great. That's Israel, because of its dynamic engine for innovation. It's been interesting to watch over the years how that's really snowballed. And in all different, if you travel the world, as I have in certain situations, you could find Israeli technology in some of the craziest places in the world. And again, just a credit to the everyday Israeli innovator. Like you said, it's not, the government's great. It provides, the government, as you said, is focused more than other governments. I think that's a good point for our listeners. The Israeli government is very focused. When we talk about specifically the cyber realm, how do Israel and the United States really work together to achieve better cybersecurity in our respective nations and around the world? And that's, again, as I opened up this episode, talking about the concept of Israel, as America being a cyber leader as it is, but we're not alone. In Israel, as you mentioned, I said 20%. It's now 40% of the world investment. Is a tremendous. It's almost half the entire market out of this tiny country. aligning with the United States to better secure data, to better secure environments, infrastructure that's vital to Western democracies around the world. Tell us a little bit about how some of these programs. I know BIRD is one. I'll let you describe what that is to our audience. I won't steal your thunder there. Tell us about BIRD. Tell us about other ways that the American government's collaborating with their strategic ally, the State of Israel.
For sure. It's definitely, I think, become a far greater priority for both governments of both countries to sort of deepen that collaboration in cyber and to move it to the level that they have, that exists in intelligence and military and areas like that. So one avenue of that, and you did mention BIRD, I think it's a very creative program, widely known in Israel, less widely known in the US, but it's actually a US government and Israeli government joint funded program to promote industrial research. So BIRD stands for By Industrial Research and Development. And the idea is one or more US companies and one or more Israeli companies come together with kind of complementary products to create essentially an entirely new sort of solution or product that can then be offered in the market and can actually be commercialized. It does have a strong commercial element to it. It's the idea of creating something new that can be commercialized and sold. So the way BIRD works is the grants are available for up to $1 million, $1.5 million actually in cyber. And the companies and consortiums that win these deals, win these opportunities, it's a way to promote kind of really cutting edge research that some of these companies might not do on their own, just because they would be worried about the risk of failure, right? And they wouldn't want to sink money into something like that. So the BIRD program exists to actually encourage US and Israeli companies to join up, to partner up, and to do things that really, really push the envelope, knowing that if they do fail, they don't have to pay anything back, right? So it's sort of no risk. It's a way to encourage that real kind of frontier technology. And if the project succeeds and it starts selling, successfully in the market, which many of them do, then you repay the grant, but you sort of over time a little bit, a couple percentage out of sales from the actual product you've created. So it's sort of no risk money. It's very, I think, very attractive. There's now, as I mentioned, there is the general BIRD program. There's a BIRD, a sub-BIRD Homeland Security program. There's a BIRD Energy in cooperation with the U.S. Department of Energy, and BIRD Cyber was recently just launched between Department of Homeland Security and the Israel National Cyber Directorate, the INCD. Both sides are actively soliciting companies. So if there are any US companies out there, I would encourage you to go to the BIRD website, just Google BIRD Foundation and look at their cyber program. It will tell you the kinds of projects and the kinds of areas within technology that DHS and the INCD are looking for. So that is certainly one way that Israel is cooperating closely with the U.S. Obviously, there's huge amounts of intelligence sharing behind the scenes. Obviously, a lot of that is between 8200 and the U.S. military, or 8200 and the NSA. The Israel National Cyber Directorate, which was, again, Israel was the first country to create a purely dedicated cyber agency. And the Director General of the Cyber Directorate, by the way, reports directly to the Prime Minister, right? So it's not part of another agency. They purposely set it up that way under Prime Minister Netanyahu at the time to really kind of prioritize cyber. So the INCD works closely with DHS, with CISA, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, as well as a number of other organizations. There was actually recently an agreement just signed within the last few weeks between the Israeli Ministry of Finance and the Department of Treasury on cybersecurity for the global financial system and cooperation there. So there's a number of areas where the U.S. and Israel are cooperating, and I would say it's still pretty early stages of what can be done, right? So you've seen even the things I've referenced, the finance ministry and the Department of Treasury and Bird Cyber. These have all literally just launched in the last few months. So I think this cooperation in cyber is really only going to deepen.
That's fantastic. Congratulations to the state of Israel on that recent agreement. I didn't see that, but everyone is vital in any way we can work together to fend off these nefarious state actors. And we'll get into more of that here shortly. The Bird, I mean, these are great programs, and I'm glad our listeners can hear this. And like you said, if there are folks listening out there who could benefit from this, then by all means. With Israel's prowess in the cyber realm, has that made it, would you say, more of a target or less? Are countries maybe thinking twice, maybe about attacking Israel's infrastructure?
Unfortunately, Israel lives in a dangerous neighborhood. The Abraham Accords, I do think, are a game changer. I think more countries will sign on to the Abraham Accords. I think it's increasingly understood that Israel is a fact of life in the neighborhood. You have a country like the UAE that is actively looking to go beyond purely diplomatic relations and really deepening economic cooperation and seeing Israel as a close ally. But you also have nefarious actors and sort of common enemies like an Iran or Hezbollah that have not let up. And when the Iranian regime's opening position is "we want to destroy you," and when the leader of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, has said that the Jews love life and we love death, that's difficult, right? When the other side's opening position is "we want to kill you," right? So that hasn't gone away. Yes, Israel's cyber prowess is known, but that doesn't mean that Israel is immune from the kinds of attacks that you read about all the time in the U.S. I mean, as good as Israel is, if someone really wants to hit you, there's a chance they can eventually find a way. So there have been two, I think, high-profile attacks. One of which, and it was widely reported in the news in April 2020, shortly after the pandemic began, the Iranian regime crossed an incredible red line that is really shocking in a way. They targeted Israel's water infrastructure with the idea of raising chlorine levels within the water, targeting the OT, the industrial control system, of raising the chlorine levels in the water up by about 100 times, which really could have sickened or even killed hundreds, if not thousands, of people, which is sort of unprecedented. That this occurred, right? So luckily, Israel caught it in time. The damage was was contained. Nothing actually ended up going into the actual physical realm and transferring from cyber to actually affect physical, what we could say cyber physical. But it was a pretty scary moment. And Israel obviously did retaliate. That was also in the news, widely reported. There were some logistical issues at a major Iranian port. And again, this was in the news. Then last year, about a year ago, there was a major Israeli hospital hit in the town of Hadera, and the systems were taken offline for several days. And it was a major issue, right? And it affected efficiency and even patient care. So Israel is definitely not immune to those kinds of attacks. Israel, the national electric company, Israel Electric, has always been and continues to be one of the most attacked companies in the world in terms of cybersecurity. And so I don't think that's going to change. But at the same time, I think Israel's adversaries do understand that there's a lot of risk if they go too far, right? And I think a nation-state actor like Iran, I think they had a lesson from from that in terms of how Israel retaliated and the fact that their attack was unsuccessful. Does it mean they wouldn't try it again? No, but I do think there's that understanding. Now, when you get to sort of, the average criminal gangs and ransomware and, the same types of challenges that the US faces and that every country around the world faces, I mean, Israel's not immune to that, right? I mean, that's going to happen everywhere, right? No matter how strong Israel is in cyber, it has also, as I said, there's been cases where it's been victimized as well. But what I will say is having, in terms of the overall cyber defense picture, I think one area that is an advantage for Israel, and in some ways even compared to the US, is that Israel, for the civilian sector, right, everything non-military, has a single point of contact, which is the Israel National Cyber Directorate, right? So you know exactly who to call. I think in the US, I think it's amazing the amount of new money and initiatives that are going into cyber, but there's a lot of different organizations, governmental organizations, that are sort of involved in it doing different things. In Israel, it's just the INCD, and the fact that the INCD has that sort of authority, both operational and regulatory as well, I think is a big advantage for Israel. But no country is immune from something from these types of scourges these days.
Yeah, I mean, I read that. I mean, that's what a disturbing attempt. But as you said, I guess Israel's adversaries are bent, I guess, on its destruction, regardless of their cyber prowess, and they always have to be at the ready. And so, thankfully, at that moment in time, they were. I appreciate that insight. Okay, we have time for one more. We got one more question here for Josh. What's the process been like to create a safer, I call it a more unified Middle East when it comes to cybersecurity? Because the trade with the UAE, I mean, what I've read, I think is almost $2 billion in its first year in trade between those two countries, and maybe more. I could be off on that. But I mean, that seems like it's going to bode well for a cyber partnership between, at a minimum, the UAE and Israel, and of course, Bahrain and some of these other nations who would be signing on to the Abraham Accords. Maybe if you could tell us a little bit about what's happening on the cyber front with those relationships and how those are starting to blossom and bear fruit for all countries in the region.
Sure. I mean, Israel has actually done a lot already with the UAE just since the Abraham Accords. There's Israeli cyber companies have really been, sort of flooding into the UAE and just looking for new partners and opportunities. There have been a number of trade missions that have gone there. Our organization, Foreign Trade Administration, recently opened its first trade office in the UAE just within the last year, and so there's been a lot of that cooperation between, certainly within the private sector. And there's also been close cooperation at the governmental level between the UAE, Emirati Cyber Authority, and the Israel National Cyber Directorate. There's been a number of, I would say, strategic initiatives that the two have embarked on, and those relationships are very, very, very strong. Israel, of course, is also talking to the the other countries from the Abraham Accords as well, and those types of relationships are also continuing to develop in cybersecurity. I think what's been happening with the UAE, though, really stands out. There's been, I think, a great deal that has happened. Certainly with the UAE, I would say in the long run, it's going to be what I would describe as a warm peace, right? Not just an exchange of ambassadors. We're talking strategic cooperation that's going to occur at the military, intelligence, and economic level. That's already happening, and I think is only going to deepen. And I think that's going to be true of all the countries in the Abraham Accords, right? So cyber it's very early. It takes a long time to build those types of relationships, but Israel is very proactive internationally within cyber at the governmental level as well at sort of fostering those relationships. So, and I think Other countries will additionally, as I suggested, in the coming years, eventually kind of sign on to the Abraham Accords. I think there's a certain momentum for it. I don't know who they will be or when it will be, but I think it's pretty much, I would say, inevitable. So I think that type of cooperation will always have a strong cyber component to it also.
Oh, that's great news. I know we love to hear that on this side of the Atlantic. I want to thank Josh Cohen for joining us. We're out of time here. Again, the Director of Cyber Economic and Trade Office at the Embassy of the State of Israel, of course, based in Washington, D.C. And appreciate all of the inside baseball, if I could call it that here, that you shared with our dedicated Productivity Protected podcast community. I challenge anybody to say that 5 times fast. That would be very difficult to do. But Josh, great having you. I appreciate all your insight and look forward to helping any way that PKWARE can. And appreciate, like I said, all your preparation and time that you spent with us here today on the Productivity Protected podcast. And you're welcome to come back anytime. And I'm sure the Embassy of Israel is lucky to have you.
Well, it's very kind of you to say, and I appreciate that. I enjoyed our conversation. Productivity Protected podcast sounds like a great initiative to expose your viewers to sort of new ideas and new organizations. So I certainly, at the appropriate moment, would welcome the time to come back and continue the dialogue.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I also want to thank all of our listeners from around the globe, partners, customers, and employees alike who have tuned in. Make sure to tune in for our next episode. You guessed it. We're going to have a very special guest. That's what I can promise you. I'm not going to tell you who it is, just like I never tell you who it is. But we're going to have a special guest, just like we have Josh here. As we're ringing in almost the end of the year, I can't believe we've done so many of these episodes and we're almost at the end of the year. But appreciate all of our listeners and their commitment joining us here. Please do not hesitate to reach out to us at podcast@pkware.com. That's podcast@pkware.com for ideas, content. If you're a guest speaker like Josh here and you want to join us on the podcast, and we think that that content's going to be great for our listener community, we'd love to have you. So don't hesitate to write us in. If you're interested in a certain cyber area, you want to have a luminary come and discuss, tell us what that subject matter is. We'll find someone to come talk about it here with you, with me, and for our community. So thanks again. I'm going to, again, want to thank Josh Cohen from the Embassy of Israel. I'm Spencer Kupferman, the CEO of PKWARE and your host for PKWARE, PKWARE's own Productivity Protected podcast. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for joining us on today's episode of Productivity Protected. Learn more about how PKWARE protects data and workflows by visiting pkware.com, and join us next time for more insider info on protecting data wherever it lives and moves.